Air Force pilot Captain Kenny Jackson had dreamed about flying fighter jets since he was a kid. He grew up watching movies like Top Gun, imagining himself thousands of feet above the earth, fighting the battle that would decide a war. Years later, that little boy's dream had become his reality. Kenny was an F-35 pilot in the United States Air Force, temporarily stationed at Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina. His squadron was preparing for an upcoming deployment, where they would support an Army infantry brigade during a major offensive in the Middle East. Kenny loved flying. Unfortunately, his wife had grown to hate almost everything that came with it. Susanna Jackson was 27 years old. She and Kenny had been married for 4 years, and for the last year she had worked as a marketing specialist for a logistics company in Sumter. She hated her job, but more than that, she hated the life she felt she had been forced to build around Kenny's career. She wanted children. She wanted a husband who came home every night. She wanted weekends that didn't depend on a training schedule. She wanted the house, the family dinners, the vacations, and the normal life she saw other women enjoying. She didn't want to keep wondering when the Air Force would take her husband away again. Kenny always believed they would figure it out. Susanna had stopped believing that. One evening, Kenny came through the front door excited. His squadron had spent the week competing against another fighter squadron during a training exercise. They had done well. Kenny walked into the house, ready to tell his wife everything that had happened. Instead, he stopped in the living room. Several suitcases were sitting beside Susanna. Kenny stared at them. "What's going on?" Susanna looked at him. "I can't do this anymore, Kenny." His excitement disappeared. "Do what?" "This. Your career. The Air Force. Sitting around waiting for the next training exercise or deployment. Working a job I hate because we're here. I miss my family. I miss my friends." Kenny couldn't believe what he was hearing. "We talked about having a family." "I know. So what are you saying?" Susanna looked toward her bags. "I talked to my parents. I'm going back to Virginia. I'm sorry." Kenny stood there in silence. The decision had already been made. There wasn't an argument he could win because Susanna wasn't asking his permission. She was informing him. A short time later, Kenny stood in the doorway, watching his wife load the last suitcase into her car. She got behind the wheel. The car backed out of the driveway. Then she disappeared down the street. Kenny closed the door. The house had never sounded so quiet. For the first time, the man who had trained himself to remain calm while traveling hundreds of miles per hour sat alone on his couch and almost cried. He had always known his career required sacrifice. He just never imagined his marriage would become one of them. The next morning, Kenny wasn't himself. Colonel Jimmy Moore noticed immediately. Moore had 16 years in the Air Force and nearly a decade as a pilot. Before the morning mission briefing, he pulled Kenny aside. "What's wrong with you, Jackson?" Kenny hesitated before finally telling him. "My wife left last night." Moore studied him. For a moment, he wasn't Kenny's commanding officer. He was another man who understood exactly what military service could cost. But there was a deployment approaching, and Moore couldn't allow sympathy to interfere with safety. "I'm sorry you're going through it, but when you climb into that aircraft, I need a focused Captain Jackson in that cockpit, not the husband thinking about what happened at home." Kenny nodded. "Yes, sir. Lives are going to depend on us. If your head isn't here, I'll scratch you from the deployment myself." "I'm good, sir." Moore looked at him. "Then show me." That afternoon, Kenny climbed into his aircraft. Once the canopy closed, everything else disappeared. The empty house, Susanna, Virginia, his marriage. He pushed the aircraft through the maneuvers and felt nearly 8 Gs pressing against his body. His eyes remained locked on his displays. For those few hours, there was only the mission. 3 weeks later, Kenny was served with divorce papers. That same week, his squadron received its deployment orders. 2 nights before leaving, Kenny called his older sister Patricia, who was an attorney. They talked for almost 2 hours. Finally, Kenny picked up a pen. He signed the papers. He sent everything to Patricia. "Handle it for me." "I will. I can't deal with this and what we're about to do." "Then don't." Kenny became quiet. Patricia continued. "You handle your mission. I'll handle this." 2 days later, Captain Kenny Jackson sat aboard a military transport aircraft heading toward the Middle East. His marriage was ending behind him. A war was waiting in front of him. Over the next several weeks, Kenny's squadron flew mission after mission, supporting an Army infantry brigade advancing across the sector. Some days they flew twice. The brigade was pushing toward a strategically important airfield that coalition forces needed to secure. Every mile became more dangerous. Enemy artillery hammered the advancing ground units. Kenny and the other pilots worked overhead, protecting the soldiers moving beneath them. Eventually, the brigade pushed within 10 miles of the objective. That was when the enemy sent aircraft into the fight. Kenny was flying with 2 wingmen when the warning came across the radio. Captain Chris Taylor spotted them first. "Oh, shit!" Kenny immediately looked toward his sensors. Taylor's voice came through again. "Multiple bogeys. 12 o'clock. MiG-29s. Kenny's personal problems disappeared instantly. There was no divorce, no empty house, no Susanna, no time to feel sorry for himself. There were only 3 pilots with enemy aircraft standing between an infantry brigade and its objective. The F-35s moved to engage. What followed lasted only minutes. But inside the cockpit, it felt much longer. Aircraft twisted through the sky. Warnings sounded. Pilots called positions. Kenny fought to maintain awareness of everything happening around him. He got 1 confirmed kill. As he searched the sky for more MiGs, Taylor's voice exploded through the radio. "I'm out of flares!" Kenny looked around for his wingman. "Where are you?" Jackson screamed back into the radio. "I'm on your left flank and I got a bogey on my ass." Jackson looked toward his wingman's position. A MiG had maneuvered behind Taylor. It was trying to establish a firing solution. "Taylor, break!" Jackson screamed as the MiG pilot released a missile at Taylor. Taylor threw his aircraft into a defensive maneuver. The missile missed, but the MiG pilot stayed with him. Kenny pulled hard. The G-forces crushed him into his seat. His breathing became deliberate. His vision narrowed. He did a hard 360, pushing the jet's wings and exhaust to the limit. He could see the enemy aircraft. He pushed the throttle till he was behind the enemy jet. The MiG was seconds away from firing. Kenny maneuvered behind it. His system confirmed the shot. Taylor's voice came across the radio. "He's got a lock on me." Kenny didn't hesitate. He fired. The missile streaked toward the MiG. The enemy pilot launched another missile almost simultaneously. Seconds later, the MiG erupted in the sky. Taylor pulled hard left. The missile chasing him missed. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the radio went quiet. All 3 pilots breathed sighs of relief in their aircraft. Kenny pumped his fist once. That was all he allowed himself. "All right, get back on mission. We've still got soldiers depending on us." The formation regrouped. Below them, the infantry brigade continued forward. About an hour later, the soldiers reached their objective. Jackson and his wingmen took out the last artillery positions. The infantry guys were finally able to move on the objective. The airfield had been secured. As Kenny's formation passed overhead, soldiers on the ground raised their rifles and fists toward the sky. The pilots couldn't hear them. They didn't have to. The message was clear. Thank you. The capture of the airfield became an important victory. Coalition forces could now move personnel, equipment, and supplies deeper into the region. 3 months later, Kenny finally returned to South Carolina. But something unexpected happened while he was gone. Footage from the aerial engagement had been cleared and released by Air Force Public Affairs. The story had gone completely viral. The pilot who maneuvered into danger to save his wingman became part of the coverage surrounding this successful operation. By the time Kenny returned home, people knew Captain Kenny Jackson's name. Local news wanted interviews. Military publications covered the mission. Clips spread across social media. Kenny received 2 confirmed kills and an award recognizing his actions during the engagement. But whenever someone called him a hero, Kenny redirected the attention. There were soldiers on the ground doing their jobs. There were pilots beside me doing theirs. I just did what I was trained to do. One afternoon, Kenny sat down for another television interview. Hundreds of miles away in Virginia, one of Susanna's friends saw it. She immediately called her. "Girl, turn on the TV." Susanna found the interview. And there he was, Kenny, the same man who had stood silently in their doorway watching her drive away. Except now the words beneath his name read, Captain Kenny Jackson, F-35 pilot. The interviewer described the mission. Then they showed the footage. Susanna watched the enemy aircraft move behind Kenny's wingman. She watched Kenny turn back toward the threat. She watched the missile leave his aircraft. She watched the MiG disappear in a ball of fire. Then she listened as his wingman described the moment. "He saved my life." Susanna didn't say anything. Her phone continued buzzing. friends, family, people from South Carolina, people who knew the story. They knew she had left Kenny. They knew she had filed for divorce just before he deployed. And now millions of people were watching the man she walked away from being celebrated for protecting another pilot and helping soldiers on the ground complete their mission. Susanna stared at the television. Kenny had once told her why he loved flying. As a little boy, he dreamed of being the fighter pilot who would fly into the final battle and help save the day. She used to laugh when he said it, because life wasn't a movie, except somewhere thousands of miles from home. Kenny Jackson had gotten his moment, and Susanna finally understood something. The Air Force hadn't simply taken her husband away from her. Flying was part of the man she married. She had wanted Kenny to choose between the life she wanted and the purpose he loved. In the end, she made the choice for both of them. Kenny returned to an empty house. He placed his bags on the floor and looked around. 3 months earlier, the silence had nearly broken him. This time it felt different. Kenny walked toward the window. His phone rang. It was Chris Taylor. Kenny smiled and answered. "What's up, man?" Taylor laughed. "Just checking on the guy who saved my ass." Kenny shook his head. "You'd have done the same thing." "Yeah, but I didn't have to." Kenny looked out the window. His marriage was over. That still hurt. Maybe it always would. But somewhere along the way, Kenny had learned that losing one part of his life didn't mean his entire life was lost. He had survived the divorce. He had survived the deployment. And when another pilot needed him most, Kenny Jackson had been exactly where he was supposed to be. The little boy who dreamed about becoming a fighter pilot had finally become one. Not because he flew an F-35, not because people called him a hero, but because when everything in his personal life was falling apart, Captain Kenny Jackson still answered the call. The end. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the WriteCity Studios YouTube channel and TikTok page for stories like this and more. Comment where you are watching from. We'll see you in the next one.